Participants, welcome to this webinar on the outcomes of the 20th meeting of the Chemical Review Committee and the 20th meeting of the Persistent Organic Pollutants Review Committee. My name is Andrea Lechner. I'm a program officer in the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. I'll be presenting to you the part related to the Chemical Review Committee, and then my colleague Sharon Rivera will cover the POPs Review Committee. So welcome again, and let's get started. So the 20th meeting of the Chemical Review Committee took place from 17 to 20 October 2024 in Rome at the FAO headquarters. So the Chemical Review Committee is a subsidiary body under the Rotterdam Convention, which is entrusted with the process of listing new chemicals in Annex 3 to the Convention. There are basically two main steps, two main tracks how chemicals get added to the convention. The first is the track of notifications of final regulatory action. Whenever a party prohibits or severely restricts a chemical, it has to notify that to the convention secretariat. And when there are two notifications from two different PIC regions, they are considered by the Chemical Review Committee for potential listing under the convention. And the second track are severely hazardous pesticide formulations. So in those cases, they are proposals that can be made by developing countries and countries with economy in transition that are experiencing problems caused by severely hazardous pesticide formulations under the conditions of use in its territory. So looking again then back at the recently held CRC 20 meeting, it was chaired by Ms. Nolusuku Gawai from South Africa, and we had 93 participants, 28 members to the committee, and 65 observers. The CRC works in two steps. The first step is to review either these SHPF proposals or the notifications of final regulatory action against specific criteria set out in the convention. And if they meet the criteria, the CRC recommends listing. And then the second step is for the CRC to prepare a draft decision guidance document. So that is the final step, and then the chemical is sent to the Conference of the Parties for consideration for listing. At the last CRC meeting, there were two draft decision guidance documents prepared. So two chemicals at the last step of the review. And then on the first step, there was quite a lot of work at the last meeting. The committee had 39 notifications of final regulatory action on its agenda for review on 19 different chemicals. And the committee also reviewed 4 severely hazardous pesticide formulation proposals. On this website, you can find all the details, the meeting document, and also the meeting report once it is available. So let's start by looking at the chemicals that were at the last stage, so for which the review was finalized. The first one is chlorpyrifos. Chlorpyrifos is a widely used pesticide as an insecticide in agriculture and a biocide for non-agricultural pests. The review of the notifications of final regulatory action took place at the previous CRC meeting, so CRC 19, and their notifications from the European Union, Malaysia, and Sri Lanka were found to meet the criteria. A draft decision guidance document was then developed in the intersessional period, and then CRC 20 adopted this draft decision guidance document and forwarded to the Conference of the Parties. The COP will thus consider the recommendation for listing this chemical at its next meeting, and that is the COP 12 in April and May 2025. Interestingly, the very same chemical has also been considered for listing under the POPs Review Committee. My colleague will talk about that further, but so at the same time, this chemical will also be considered for listing under the Stockholm Convention COP next year. The second chemical that was finalized at the last step was mercury. So as you're all aware, mercury is an industrial chemical. It's used in small and artisanal scale gold mining, and in products such as lamps, batteries, medical and measuring devices, and particularly dental amalgam. Here also the review of the notifications took place at the previous meeting, CRC 19, and notifications of final regulatory action from Colombia and the European Union were found to meet the criteria. Once again, the DGD was developed intersessionally, adopted at CRC 20, and forwarded to the COP. And here again, this is a chemical that's also covered by another convention, by the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So this is a slight step to the side. This is not particularly all related to CRC 20, but we thought you might be interested now in then seeing the complete set of chemicals that will be considered for listing by the upcoming meeting of the Conference of the Parties. So we have 4 chemicals that are coming to the COP for the first time. The 2 that I mentioned just now, chlorpyrifos and mercury. And then there are 2 additional chemicals that were already finalized at CRC 19. So that is methyl bromide, a pesticide. This one is also covered by the Montreal Protocol. And then there's also paraquat, a pesticide that is also coming to this next COP for consideration for listing. A letter was sent to all parties to the convention and signatories on 4th of October, informing parties of these 4 new proposals to amend the Rotterdam Convention. And there's also an invitation for parties to comment on these amendment proposals by 14 February 2025. In addition, there are also 6 chemicals that were previously already considered by the COP, but for which no agreement on listing was reached. So they will be mentioned once again, or they will be considered once again for listing. There is acetochlor, carbosulfan, chrysotal asbestos, then severely hazardous pesticide formulation on Fenthion. There's iprodion, a pesticide, and then there's also paraquat as a severely hazardous pesticide formulation, while the new proposal that is coming is for paraquat in the pesticide category. All right, going back then to CRC 20. So for the first time in quite a long time, actually in 7 years, the CRC also considered proposals for including severely hazardous pesticide formulations. There were for 4 formulations that you can see here on the slide. They all came from the same country, the Lao People's Democratic Republic, who had done a survey on pesticide monitoring, and has then submitted these 4 proposals based on pesticide poisonings, so on the human health incident track. For 3 of them, the committee decided to defer consideration to the next meeting. They did not yet manage to reach agreement on whether it met the criteria under the convention. And then one of them, metamil soluble powder, 40%, it already agreed that it did not meet the criteria. The committee found it quite challenging to review these proposals, in particular to evaluate the criterion that is asked for the significance of the reported effects in relation to the quantity of the formulation used. So they have decided to do some intersessional work on SHPF proposals, so not on the 3 proposals specifically from the Lao People's Democratic Republic, but more on the overall approach on how to evaluate SHPF proposals. And on the slide, you can see the specific mandate that was given to this group. One is to update a document which contains a compilation of the experiences made by the committee in reviewing SHPF proposals. So that is this document set out in CRC 14 in 15. And also to see if there are any possible gaps in the information that is needed for the committee to make decisions on SHPF proposals. And the second part of the mandate would be to look into the human health incident report form and environmental incident report forms. So these are forms that are available to parties that wish to make proposals for listing SHPF under the convention. And this intersessional task group would thus also look into these forms and see if it wishes to make any suggestions on how to improve the forms so that the Chemical Review Committee has information available that facilitates its decision making. Coming then to some of the other 39 notifications that were reviewed by CRC 20. So on chlorpyrifos metal, there was actually one notification from the European Union found to meet the criteria, but that is not sufficient. There are always two notifications from two different PIC regions needed in order for the committee to proceed to a listing recommendation. So this chemical will wait for another notification meeting the criteria. Then on paraquat and paraquat dichloride, there were actually a number of additional notifications reviewed, and quite a number of them were found to meet the criteria from Burkina Faso, Cabo Verde, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. But because these were on the same chemical and the same CAS number that were already reviewed previously by CRC, and that CRC had already made the listing recommendation for this compound with these CAS numbers, these do not influence the recommendation that was already made and the draft decision guidance document already adopted. So there's no further action at present on these notifications because the recommendation to the COP has already gone out, and these notifications do not add anything new to that recommendation. And then there were quite a number of notifications for which the committee was not yet in a position to take a decision. On some of them, it is seeking additional information from the notifier, but some of them are simply passed on to the next meeting. So there was dichlorvos, where additional information was sought from the notifier, the European Union, related to the criterion of a risk evaluation involving prevailing conditions having been carried out. Then on dicofoil, there were 4 notifications, but actually the committee simply did not get to start their review, so it will only start to do so at the next meeting. Then on the Mozambique notifications, for those of you following the CRC, you know that these have been considered by the CRC already for a couple of years. So for 3 of them, Cabaril, Ethion, and Theodicarb, the consideration was moved to the next meeting. And then for 2 of them, additional information is sought from the notifier from Mozambique. For chlorphenvinphos, it relates to the use of this compound in veterinary conditions. And then for metidation, it relates to the import of metidation in Mozambique. Finally, there were also notifications from Malaysia for profenophos, fentoat, proteophos, and quinalphos. So for these, the committee had also difficulty to taking a final decision on whether it fulfilled the criteria under the convention, in particular related to the fact that there was the country itself had indicated not having done a risk or hazard evaluation when prohibiting these chemicals, but on the other hand, they had provided some information that a residue monitoring survey had led to this conclusion because the chemical was found to consistently exceed the maximum residue limits. So the committee was discussing whether that could be seen as a risk evaluation and an exposure study. And so some additional information is being sought from Malaysia, and then the committee will consider its continue its consideration at the next meeting. The CRC at its 20th meeting also continued consideration of a list of substances covered by before itsols and before related compounds. So this is an ongoing work where the Secretariat is updating a list of compounds that are included in the listing of under the convention, and they are brought regularly to the attention of the CRC for any comments. Related to the meeting report, the part that will describe narratively what happened at the meeting should be coming out fairly soon in the next 2 weeks. And then there will be separately a compilation of all the decisions taken, and that is taking a little bit longer. It should come out by the end of November. And those dates are for the English version, and then translation usually takes about 2 months. But it's not yet determined whether everything can be translated because there have been some reductions to the budget at the last meeting of the Conference of the Parties. So meeting reports of the CRC might not be translated anymore. And then the committee also agreed on its next meeting, CRC 21, which was scheduled to take place between 22nd and 26th of September next year, once again at the FAO headquarters in Rome, back to back with the 21st meeting of the POPs Review Committee. With that, thank you very much for your attention. There will be time for questions and answers or comments after the second presentation given by my colleague Sharon on the POPs Review Committee. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. At the outset, I would like to apologize for my voice. I'll try to speak as clear as possible. I have bad sore throat and cough, and I'm just recovering from the flu. I hope I'm comprehensible in any case, but if you have any questions later, we have time for discussions. So let me start by recalling the organization of Pop Rock 20, which was held on 23 to 27 September 2024, back to back with the CRC 20 meeting at the FAO headquarters. We had online pre-meetings on 11 September 2024. Pop Rock 20 was chaired by Mr. Peter Dawson of New Zealand, and all in all, we had 143 participants, 30 members, and 113 observers. So the member from Sudan was not able to attend. All documents, pre-session documents, are available on the Pop Rock 20 website. This is an overview of the key outcomes of the meeting. So Pop Rock 20 came up with 3 listing decisions. First of all, it recommended the listing of chlorpyrifos in Annex A, specific exemptions following the adoption of the risk management evaluation for the chemical. And also, Pop Rock 20 strengthened the recommendations for listing 2 chemicals, which it had already recommended in Pop Rock 19 for listing in Annex A with specific exemptions, namely long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids and related compounds, for which Pop Rock 20 further specified the exemptions, and chlorinated paraffins with carbon chain lengths in the range C14 to 17 and chlorination levels at or exceeding 45% chlorine by weight, for which Pop Rock also further specified exemptions, and in addition clarified the chemical identity and recommended concentration limits. In addition, Pop Rock agreed that PBDDFs and PBCDDFs met the screening criteria in Annex D and agreed to establish an intersessional working group to work on a risk profile in accordance with Annex C. This was following on from a proposal submitted by Switzerland for the listing of the chemical. Pop Rock also decided to submit a report on the options for identifying POPs in stockpiles, products, and articles in use and in wastes, and on issues related to the production, import, and export of products and articles containing POPs with a set of recommendations. Finally, Pop Rock provided comments on the draft evaluation of brominated diphenyl ethers, an indicative list of PFOA, its salts and PFOA-related compounds, PFHXS, its salts, and PFHXS-related compounds. The report and decisions will be made available on the Pop Rock 20 website very soon in all official UN languages. Okay, let's start with the first chemical, which was recommended for listing at COP12 by the Pop Rock. So Pop Rock adopted the risk management evaluation for chlorpyrifos and decided to recommend to the COP its listing in Annex A to the convention with specific exemptions for production and use for plant protection, control on ticks for cattle, and wood preservation. However, the committee noted that some countries may require additional time to phase out uses of chlorpyrifos for certain other crop and pest combinations, such as, for example, for cotton, and to transition to alternatives. At this juncture, I also wish to inform that, as with CRC, a letter has been circulated to all official contact points and national focal points, copying the permanent missions to inform parties and signatories of the amendment proposals. And this letter was circulated last week on 25 October 2024 with an invitation for comments by 14 February 2025. Now let's move to the next chemical recommended for listing by the POPROC. The committee recalled its decision, so it was POPROC 19/1, in which it recommended to the COP that it consider listing chlorinated paraffins with carbon chain lengths in the range C14 to 17 and chlorination levels at or exceeding 45% chlorine by weight, subject to further specifying the chemical identity in Annex A to the Convention with specific exemptions. POPROC 20 assessed the information provided by parties and observers in accordance with Decision POPROC 19/1 and adopted the risk management evaluation for chlorinated paraffins and decided to recommend to the COP to consider listing chlorinated paraffins with the further specified exemptions you see on the screen. Furthermore, the committee clarified the chemical identity of chlorinated paraffins and recommended concentration limits. And in this regard, it recommended the addition of an addition to Annex A, which specifies that the concentration limit does not apply to the production and use of chlorinated paraffins with carbon chain lengths in the range C14 to 17 and chlorination levels below 45% by weight for a period of 5 years from the date of entry into force of the amendment, subject to review by the COP at COP 14 and every second ordinary meeting thereafter. And the objective of this is to determine whether this period needs to be extended. Parties are obliged to notify the Secretariat of its intention to make use of this provision, along with information on their intended uses. The use of chlorinated paraffins shall be eliminated except for parties that have notified the Secretariat of their intention to use them in accordance with Article 4. So the next slide also further specifies the specific exemptions that were agreed on by the committee for the listing of chlorinated paraffins in Annex A. Next, the next chemical that was considered by the POPROC is long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids, their salts, and related compounds. The committee also recalled its decision in POPROC 19, it was decision 19/2, in which it recommended to the COP that it consider listing long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids, their salts, and related compounds in Annex A to the Convention with specific exemptions. At the last meeting, the committee assessed the information provided by parties and observers in accordance with said decision and adopted the addendum to the risk management evaluation for long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids, their salts, and related compounds, and also further specified the exemptions, as you can see on the screen. The committee agreed that in order to support parties and observers and to facilitate the identification of substances, an initial indicative list of the chemical has been prepared as set out in document POPROC 20 INF17, and this has already been posted on the PopRock 20 website. The committee also decided to establish an intersessional working group to prepare a draft indicative list of long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids, their salts and related compounds, on the basis of the list set out in document INF17, and to provide comments on the indicative list covered by the listing of PFOA, its salts and PFOA-related compounds, PFHXS, its salts, and PFHXS-related compounds for consideration by the committee at its 21st meeting. The committee also recommended that in case the COP should decide to list long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids, their salts and related compounds, that it establish a process for the identification of substances covered by such a listing. So this takes into account the process that had been established for PFOA, PFOA-related compounds, and PFHXS and PFHXS-related compounds, as set out in decision of the Stockholm Convention Decision 11/8. So next, the committee also considered the proposal submitted by Switzerland and undertook an evaluation whether PBDDFs and PBCDDFs met the criteria of Annex D to the Convention. It used as a primary source of information the proposal submitted by Switzerland as contained in pre-session document PopRock 20/5. The scope of the evaluation covered PBDDFs and mixed PBCDDFs and excluded polychlorinated dibenzopdioxins and dibenzofurans, which are already listed in Annex C to the Convention. The committee agreed that the chemicals met the screening criteria in Annex D and decided to establish an ad hoc working group to further review the proposal and to prepare a draft risk profile in accordance with Annex E to the Convention. The committee also invited parties and observers to submit to the Secretariat the information specified in Annex E to the Convention before 2 December 2024. Next, the committee decided to submit a report to COP12 on the options for identifying POPs in stockpiles, products, and articles in use and in wastes, and on issues related to the production, import, and export of products and articles containing POPs with a set of recommendations. So here, the committee recommended that the COP continue work on further improving the identification of POPs in stockpiles, products, and articles in use and in waste, especially taking into account the challenges experienced by developing countries on their need for capacity building and technical assistance, and also recommended that the COP continue cooperating and coordinating with other forums relevant to the identification of POPs, such as the Basel Convention, the Rotterdam Convention, the INC, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on the establishment of a new treaty on plastics, Montreal Protocol, and other forums, and to invite those international agreements and initiatives to consider the outcomes and information provided in the above report. Also, the committee recommended that the COP explore ways to improve the identification of POPs in products and articles using the harmonized commodity description and coding system, and continue collaborating with the World Customs Organization. Finally, the committee requested the Secretariat to continue to raise awareness among parties of the existing guidance that already exists relevant to the identification of POPs. And finally, the committee provided comments on the draft evaluation and review of brominated diphenyl ethers pursuant to paragraph 2 of parts 4 and 5 of Annex A, contained in working document POPROC 20/7, as well as on the indicative list of PFOA, its salts, and PFOA-related compounds, PFH excess, its salts, and PFH excess-related compounds. Following comments from members and observers, the committee agreed to entrust the Secretariat with finalizing the draft report and review of the continued need for specific exemptions on BDEs, taking into account the comments made during the plenary discussions at POPROC 20 and additional submissions to the Secretariat in writing for consideration at the 12th meeting of the Conference of the Parties next year. Regarding the indicative lists, based on the additional comments received from members and observers, the Secretariat prepared a revised version of the PFOA indicative list, and based on the same comments, there did not appear to be any need to update the list for PFHXS, its salts, and PFHXS related compounds. Andrea had mentioned earlier the dates for the POPROC 20 the CRC 21 meeting taking place next year. And at this juncture, I also want to mention that POPROC 21 is scheduled to be held from September 29 to October 3, 2025. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Sharon. So we can now move on to the question and answer part of this webinar. So if you have any questions or would like to make any comments, you can send them in the chat. But we will also now allow microphones to be unmuted. So you can also raise your hand and ask your question orally if you prefer. Please do not hesitate if you have any questions. And of course, the presentations will be sent around by email after the webinar, as always. Thanks. Okay, we have a first question on POPROC. Sharon, it's in the chat.
Yes, it's from Andreas. Thanks, Andreas. If you're referring to the number of days of POPROC 21, we still have it budgeted for 5 days of meetings next year from September 21 to October 3. The pre-meeting is scheduled to be organized online as we had done this year, but it still remains to be budgeted at 5 days of meetings. And that is also the duration that is submitted for consideration by COP12 for POPROC 22 and POPROC 23, 5 days of meeting days, and a pre-session meeting to be held online. I hope that answers the question. There's also a question from Ms. Yusuke Komano. If I understand your question correctly, indeed, the chemical identity for chlorinated paraffins had been clarified by POPROC 20, and it's referenced in the decision adopted by POPROC 20. And if regarding your question whether there are any plans to consider the specific CAS to be designated in the MCCP in the future, there is no wording on that in the decision. But I can get back to you on that if there was any discussion regarding that in the contact groups. But that was not referenced in the decision. Yes, we will have to get back to you on that point of your question.
Thank you for your answer. I understand the situation. I look forward to your hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Pauline Gillet concerning PFAS. While solutions exist for companies recommended by the OECD, why not consider listing the entire PFAS family for non-essential uses? I can only say that POPROC and the Stockholm Convention operates on the basis of rules for procedure with regard the listing of chemicals. So there is a process for the listing of chemicals that is followed under POPROC. So we work on the basis of that procedure. Having said that, if any party should submit a proposal for the listing of a specific chemical, it will then be considered by the committee whether it meets the conditions for consideration by POPROC. So I can't answer your question on that basis, but just to say that listing is undertaken on the basis of a set rule specified in the rules of procedure of the committee. Ms. Ebtesam, could you please clarify your question? Ms. Ebtesam from Oman, you had a question on AFFF foam, which contain PFOS. Can you? Okay. Ms. Ebtesam, if you don't mind, we will revert to your question. I have no knowledge of AFF foam, which being contained in PFOS, but if you wish, I can revert to you after consulting with my colleagues. I can get back to you directly on this. Andrea, there is a question on polyurethane. Miss Rima Mustafa, could you please clarify your question? Apologies, I also don't understand the question very well. If you wish, you can write directly to us and we can revert to you. If you can give us the full details of your question.
If there are no additional questions, we would be wrapping up this webinar. So we have another webinar this Wednesday, 30 October at a later time of the day. Should you or any colleagues be interested, it's going to be the same webinars today. Please do not hesitate to send us any additional questions in writing anytime. Have a nice day and thank you very much for attending this webinar. Bye-bye.